One thought is eternal. One thought becomes the ocean, and one thought turns into the mulberry field. Slay 1,000 demons with one thought, and kill 10,000 immortals with one thought. Solipsism, Eternity. Chapter 5: What to do if you lose your life. As soon as the wooden sword fell into the pot, there was no special change. Bai Xiaochun let out a light gasp, and opened his eyes unwillingly, staring at the wooden sword carefully. But after waiting for a long time, nothing strange happened. Bai Xiaochun thought for a while, looked at the lines on the turtle-patterned pot, and then at the ashes of the wood in the stove, thoughtfully, turned and left the room. When I came back after a while, I already had a few pieces of wood in my hand that were the same as those in the previous fire stove. This kind of wood is not a very common thing in the fire stove room, so he asked Fatty Zhang to ask for some. Lighting the wood, Bai Xiaochun immediately saw the first streak on the tortoise-patterned pot, and it became bright again, and the wood fire burned rapidly and gradually went out. When Bai Xiaochun's mind moved, the wooden sword in the pot suddenly shone with silver light. Bai Xiaochun took a few steps back. The light dissipated after a while, and he immediately felt a sharp sense coming from the pot. He took a deep breath, approached carefully, saw the wooden sword in the pot, and there appeared a glaring silver streak, the same as Lingmi, which was slowly fading, and finally turned dark silver. The entire sword body is slightly different from before, although it is still made of wood. But it gives off a sense of sharp metal. Bai Xiaochun's eyes lit up. He stepped forward and carefully took out the wooden sword. It felt a bit heavier, and brought it closer sometimes. There is even a sense of coldness. It's done. This wooden sword has successfully refined the spirit once. Bai Xiaochun was ecstatic, held the wooden sword and couldn't put it down, looked at the pot again, thought about how to deal with it, and finally decided to put it here. The more it is like this, the more no one cares. As for the spirit rice, just eat it. But the wooden sword is not easy to be seen by others. Bai Xiaochun thought about covering it with some dye. Maybe it can weaken the light of the spirit pattern. Thinking of this, he tidied up, walked out of the house, and pretended to be nothing, until a few nights later, he brushed some juices of various colors in the stove room collected during these days on the wooden sword, making the wooden sword it looked colorful and tattered. And then manipulated it a bit, and found that the spirit pattern was indeed covered a lot, and it was no longer so obvious, so he nodded in satisfaction. In the days that followed, Bai Xiaochun felt like a fish in water in the fire stove room, got along well with a few senior brothers, and became familiar with the work of the fire stove room, especially the different fires required for different spiritual foods, and even the same color fire, two-color fire. He also understood that the wood under the tortoise pattern pot before was the spirit wood that produced one-color fire. Especially Fatty Zhang liked Bai Xiaochun's place quite a lot, and he took more care of it. After a few months, it was true that, as Fatty Zhang once said, Bai Xiaochun's place gradually became fatter. Today, he is no longer the skinny person he was when he first entered the sect. He has gained weight several times, but he is even more fair. He looks more and more harmless to humans and animals, and he seems to be approaching the name Bai Jupang. As for the extra meal, I went through it a few times, but what troubled Bai Xiaochun was that his weight had increased. But his practice was always slow, and then he simply stopped thinking about it, and ate and drank with his senior brothers all day long. Okay? Zizai, in the past few months, he has heard a lot about many things in the sect from Fatty Zhang, and he has a certain understanding of Lingxi sect. Knowing that there are inner disciples and outer disciples in the sect, if the handyman can cultivate to the third level of condensing energy, he can go to the trial road of each peak, and if he succeeds, he can enter the peak of the trial, becoming an outer disciple of this peak. And only becoming an outer disciple can be regarded as stepping into the threshold of Lingxi sect. However, this matter is like a fish jumping into a dragon's gate. The trial road of each peak is opened every month and only the top 3 are selected. So the number of people who become outer disciples is fixed throughout the year. On this day, 7 Fatty was supposed to go down the mountain to go shopping, but it was delayed due to something. Zhang Depeng waved his hand and asked Bai Xiaochun to go down the mountain. Feeling uneasy, I went back to the room and took out 7 or 8 kitchen knives, and put on 5 or 6 leather jackets, and my whole body almost turned into a ball. But I still felt unsafe, so I found a strong pot and carried it on my back. Only then did I feel a sense of security, and I staggered out of the stove and went down the mountain. Walking on the bluestone road of the Zongmen, Bai Xiaochun looked at the magnificent courtyards and lofts around him, and a deep sense of superiority arose in his heart. Life is like a dream. I, Bai Xiaochun, have been practicing for several months in this life. When I look back on the mortal world, I think back to the village in the past, full of embarrassment. He was talking to himself emotionally, with his hands behind his back, 7 or 8 kitchen knives hanging from his waist, a black pot on his back, and layers of leather jackets on his body, like a tattered leather ball. He met many handymen on the way. After him, they all looked sideways. Especially the few female disciples, when they saw Bai Xiaochun, they covered their mouths and chuckled lightly after seeing Bai Xiaochun. Their laughter was like a silver bell, quite sweet. Bai Xiaochun's round face flushed slightly, feeling that he was becoming more and more powerful, coughed dryly, walked forward with head held high. Not long after, before he got out of the handyman area of the 3rd peak, he suddenly saw many handymen in the distance. All of them looked excited, and ran quickly in one direction, where the mountain road of the 3rd peak was located. It is usually a place where outer disciples haunt. Gradually, more and more handymen were excited and ran one after another. Bai Xiaochun was taken aback by this scene, and he quickly picked the thinnest boy among the people passing by him, and grabbed him. "Brother, what happened? Why are you running there?" Bai Xiaochun asked curiously. The young man showed displeasure when someone grabbed his body. But when he saw the big black pot behind Bai Xiaochun's back, envy immediately appeared in his eyes, and his expression eased. "It turned out to be the senior from Huozifang. You should go and have a look too. I heard that Zhou Hong and Zhang Yida, among the disciples of the outer sect, are fighting in the proving ground at the foot of the mountain. They have some personal grievances. It is said that they are both at the 6th level. Well, this kind of viewing, you have to go and see it anyway. Maybe you can learn a thing or two and gain something." After the boy explained, he was afraid that there would be no room if he went late, so he ran forward quickly. Bai Xiaochun was very curious, so he also ran over, followed the flow of people, and after a while, he left the handyman area, arrived at the foot of the 3rd peak, and saw a huge high platform there. The high platform was thousands of feet in size, and at the moment, there were countless handymen densely surrounding it, and there were even quite a few figures on the mountain, obviously dressed in expensive clothes. All of them were disciples from the outer sect, and they were also watching. As for the high platform, at this moment there are 2 young men wearing the same luxurious robes, one with a scar on his face and the other as white as jade. Their figures are intertwined with each other, and there are bursts of roaring sounds. Both of them had precious lights shining on their bodies, and a small flag in front of the scar-faced youth, without wind, was waving automatically, as if an invisible hand grasped and waved it, forming a misty tiger, and the roar was deafening. And the young man with a face as white as jade. His figure shuttled back and forth, with a small blue sword, drawing bursts of spiritual marks, whistling away with great agility. Bai Xiaojun, who saw this scene, opened his eyes wide, took a deep breath. He could also control a wooden sword. But compared with that young man with a face as white as jade, it was hard to compare. In particular, the two of them didn't seem to have much reservations when they shot. They were murderous, and even several times were quite dangerous, so that they had many wounds on their bodies. Although there was no vital point, it was shocking to see. This is the first time Bai Xiaojun has seen monks fighting. It is completely different from the immortals in his impression. The ferocity and hostility made him shudder. Cultivating immortals. Isn't it for longevity? Why do you fight and kill? What if you lose your life? Bai Xiaojun swallowed a mouthful of saliva. When he saw the scar-faced youth Xiaoqi transformed into Wuhu, he took a ferocious mouthful to the other side. When the person devoured away, Bai Xiaojun wiped the sweat from his brow, feeling that it was too dangerous outside. It would be safer to go back to the stove. Thinking of this, he quickly retreated, but at the same time as he retreated, a loud roar came from not far away. Bai Xiaojun. As soon as Bai Xiaojun turned his head, he immediately saw Su Baokai, who had written the blood book at the beginning, rushing towards him with a smirk on his face. The wooden sword in front of him emitted an unusual light, which was obviously not comparable to a layer of condensed energy. At this moment, he drew a arcing, emitting a not weak spiritual pressure. It came straight to Bai Xiaojun. Seeing the wooden sword approaching, Bai Xiaojun's pupils shrank, and he immediately felt a strong life and death crisis. This is to kill me. Realizing this, he uttered a miserable scream and ran away. Killed, killed. The voice was so loud that many servants around heard it, and they looked at each other in surprise. Even Zhou Hong and Zhang Yida, who were fighting on the high platform, paused for a moment. The waves are huge. Even Su Baokai was taken aback. He obviously just called out the opponent's name and chased after him. The sword hadn't touched the opponent yet, but Bai Xiaojun screamed, as if he had punched several holes in his body. Bai Xiaojun is capable, don't run away. Su Baocai's face was ashen, his teeth itching with hatred. He went straight to Bai Xiaojun to chase after him. If I had the ability, I would have killed you long ago, and what a fart I am, killing people, killing people. Bai Xiaojun screamed at an extremely fast speed, like a fat rabbit. He was almost gone in a blink of an eye. At the same time, at the top of the mountain, there is a hanging pavilion, in which two monks, one middle-aged and one old, are sitting opposite each other, playing chess with each other. The middle-aged one is Li Qingho, and the old man opposite him, his head was full of white hair. His face was ruddy, and his eyes were full of light. He looked extraordinary, and now he glanced down the mountain and laughed. Qingho, the little baby you brought back is interesting. It made the head laugh. This kid's character needs to be tempered a little more. Li Qingho felt a little headache. After dropping the chess pieces, he shook his head and said, "The kids in Huozifang are all proud and proud. It's not easy for this kid to get along with them." The old man stroked his beard with a teasing look in his eyes. Chapter 6 Aura ascends to the head. At the foot of the third peak, Bai Xiaochun's screams were cadenced and reverberated continuously, attracting the surprised attention of countless servants. It can be clearly seen that Bai Xiaochun, who is carrying a big black pot and wearing 7 or 8 leather jackets, Wei Yuan's body is running hard along the path in the handyman area at the foot of the mountain. Even from a distance, you may not be able to see Bai Xiaochun's body clearly, but you can definitely see a big black pot galloping across the ground like a beetle. Especially the 7 or 8 kitchen knives hanging on Bai Xiaochun's body collided with each other when he was running, and there were bursts of clinking sounds. "I killed someone, help me! I don't want to die!" Bai Xiaochun shouted as he ran, running faster and faster. Su Baokai behind him looked ashen, his eyes showed a strong fierce look, and his heart was even more anxious and angry. He chased Bai Xiaochun along the way, and many handymen around him were attracted. Su Baokai was worried about attracting the deacon's attention, and felt a little flustered in his heart. "Stop barking, damn it! Keep your voice down, what's your name? Shut up!" Su Baokai roared angrily, gritted his teeth, and made a tactic with both hands. Immediately, the wooden sword beside him flashed light, and the speed was a little faster, and he flew straight to Bai Xiaochun in front of him. With a bang, the wooden sword directly hit the black cauldron on Bai Xiaochun's back, and at the same time as there were bursts of buzzing, Bai Xiaochun continued to run as if nothing had happened. Su Baokai gritted his teeth fiercely. The Bai Xiaochun in front of him was carrying a cauldron, blocking most of his body. Unable to make a move, he chased out again unwillingly. The two, one in front and one behind, kept running in the handyman area. This guy took the blame for running so fast. Su Baokai was out of breath. Seeing that Bai Xiaochun was about to run away, the more he chased, the more aggrieved he became. With his cultivation of the second level of qi condensation, he already had the strength to feed, but the other party was like a rabbit whose tail was stepped on. "I can't catch up no matter what." What's even more hateful is that he was extremely tired here, and he didn't do anything to the other party, but this Bai Xiaochun's screaming did not weaken from the beginning to the end, like killing a pig. In the blink of an eye, Bai Xiaochun saw the small road in front of the fire kitchen. His eyes showed excitement. The feeling of seeing home almost brought tears to his eyes. "Senior brother, help, murder!" Bai Xiaochun yelled, and ran back to the stove room in a hurry. Zhang Depang and others were stunned when they heard the miserable scream, and walked out immediately. "Brother, save me, Su Baokai is going to kill me, my life is almost gone." Bai Xiaochun hurriedly hid behind Fatty Zhang. "Su Baokai?" Fatty Zhang's eyes flashed fiercely when he heard the words, and he looked around, but he didn't see half a figure. While talking, he saw Su Baocai's figure running towards him panting. At this moment, Bai Xiaochun also noticed Su Baocai's figure, and was very surprised. "Hey! Why is he running so slowly?" Fatty Zhang looked down at Bai Xiaochun, then at Su Baokai who had just arrived panting. The flesh on his face trembled. Su Baokai managed to catch up here, and as soon as he got close, he heard Bai Xiaochun's surprised words at the door of the Huozao room from a distance. With a loud roar, he swung his right hand to the side, and the wooden sword beside him whizzed out, piercing directly into the big tree beside him. With a bang, the tree shook, and a hole appeared through it. "Bai Xiaochun, you and I are at odds." Su Baocai's eyes were bloodshot. He stared at Bai Xiaochun, then at Zhang Depang's huge body, turned and left bitterly. Bai Xiaochun's heart was pounding. He glanced at the big tree that had been penetrated, then at the hysterical Su Baokai. trying to swallow his saliva, feeling uneasy in his heart. Fatty Zhang looked at Su Baocai's back, a glint of coldness flashed in his eyes. He turned his head and patted Bai Xiaochun's shoulder. Junior brother ninth, don't be afraid. Although Su Baocai has a little background, if he dares to come again, our senior brother will give him a leg. At this point, Fatty Zhang changed the subject. However, ninth junior brother, if you cannot go out recently, you should not go out. You see that you have lost weight. Senior brother will make up for you. Elder Zhou will celebrate his birthday in a few days. Bai Xiaochun nodded absent-mindedly, his gaze kept on looking at the hole in the tree that Su Baocai pierced through. Until he returned to Huazhao with his senior brothers, in his room, Bai Xiaochun sat there. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. The opponent's wooden sword could pierce a hole in a tree. If it was on him, wouldn't it be death? No body. No, unless I don't stay out of the fire kitchen in my life. What if he blocks me once I go out? Bai Xiaochun couldn't get rid of Su Baocai's eyes with strong resentment before he left. I came here to live forever, I can't die. Bai Xiaochun's eyes gradually turned bloodshot due to his insecure anxiety, and after a long while, he gritted his teeth hard. Grandma, fight, I'm afraid even if I try my best. Bai Xiaochun's eyes were bloodshot. His character is not so much afraid of death, but rather a serious lack of security. After experiencing this scene today, he was greatly stimulated, inspired the persistence in his temperament. I want to practice, I want to become stronger. Panting heavily, Bai Xiaochun made up his mind, and immediately took out the bamboo book of Ziki riding the cauldron kung fu, looked at the second picture, and practiced with red eyes. Although he was afraid of death, he had a fierce spirit, otherwise he couldn't worry about being struck by lightning every time he lit incense. But he still insisted on lighting it 13 times in 3 years. At this moment, he started to be ruthless, following the actions in the second picture, and persisted stubbornly. He could only hold on to the second picture for about 10 breaths on weekdays. But this time he persisted until 15 breaths. Despite the soreness in his body and the continuous dripping of sweat beads on his forehead, the ruthlessness in Bai Xiaochun's eyes remained undiminished until he persisted until he reached 20 breaths, and at 30 breaths, the stream of energy in his body suddenly increased by 10%. It was dark, and it took a long time to gasp for breath, but it was only a moment of relaxation, and then began to practice again. One night without talking, the second day, the third day, the fourth day. For 15 days in a row, Bai Xiaochun never left his room except to eat, drink and scatter. This kind of boring thing, for a new practitioner, it was hard to persevere, but he didn't give up at all. Zhang Depeng and the others were also shocked by Bai Xiaochun's practice. You must know that the practice of Ziki cauldron controlling Kung Fu is not an easy task. Although it is easy to learn in principle, but if the movements of each level are performed for a long time, there will be indescribable drama. It takes a lot of perseverance to persevere for a long time. On weekdays, the servants of the sect usually practice once every few days. Right now, Bai Xiaochun has been practicing continuously for half a month. Zhang Depeng and others came to visit one after another, and saw a completely different Bai Xiaochun from what they remembered these few months. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was messy, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked very embarrassed, but he was very serious. No matter how painful he was, he never stopped. Even his body has obviously lost a lot of weight, and the spiritual power emanating from his body has also increased by more than half. and he has infinitely approached the great perfection of the condensed air layer. It seems that the treasures of heaven and earth accumulated in the fat have been refined in an extreme way, and become part of his own cultivation, and his body is much stronger than ordinary people. Junior brother ninth, take a break. You have been cultivating day and night for more than half a month. Zhang Depang and others hurriedly persuaded, but what they saw was the firm gaze in by Xiaochun's eyes, who raised his head. Zhang Depang and the others were shocked. Time passed. And in the blink of an eye, Bai Xiaochun had practiced for a whole month. During this month, his madness shocked Zhang Depang and others. In Zhang Depang's words, Bai Xiaochun was not practicing, but risking his life. At the time of the second picture, under Bai Xiaochun's practice, he finally broke through 100 breaths and reached more than 150 breaths. The spiritual energy in his body is no longer a stream, but much larger. Until another month passed, Zhang Depang and the others were all terrified, fearing that one day Bai Xiaochun would play him to death, and even when he was planning to quietly destroy Su Baokai, a loud roar came from Bai Xiaochun's room. With the reverberation of the voice, a spiritual pressure of the second layer of condensed energy immediately erupted from where Bai Xiaochun was, spreading over a radius of more than 10 feet, making Zhang Depang and others who were cooking immediately look up. One by one all moved. Little brother has made a breakthrough. The second level of condensed gas, although there are extra meals from time to time in our fire stove room, it has become the second level of condensed gas in less than half a year, which is also very rare. It took me a whole year to get to the second floor of qi condensation back then. Just as Zhang Depang and the others were sighing, the door of Bai Xiaochun's room opened with a creak. His face was exhausted, his body was sloppy, but the gleaming Bai Xiaochun stepped out. Zhang Depang and the others were about to go up to say hello, but they saw Bai Xiaochun's body sway, and landed deftly on the fence wall of the Huozao house yard. The deputy master looked lonely. Why is he standing there? He looks weird. Junior brother, is this crazy? Zhang Depang and others looked at each other in blank dismay. Just when everyone was surprised by Bai Xiaochun's behavior, they heard Bai Xiaochun's old-fashioned voice on the fence. Su Baokai, as the peerless arrogance among the handymen of the Lingxi sect, has a fierce reputation and is known to everyone in the world. His cultivation base has even reached an astonishing second-level qi condensation, and I am also a second-level qi condensation. In this battle between me and him, evenly matched. Even though I can spread my name to the world and make a sensation in the sect, but my flesh and blood must be bloody, my bones broken and tendons injured. No, this battle is very important. I have to continue to practice. After finishing speaking, Bai Xiaochun took a deep look into the distance, flicked his sleeves, and returned to the house. With a bang, as the door closed, Zhang Depang and others swallowed one by one. Look at me, look at me, look at you. After a long while, He Sanpeng asked uncertainly. Could it be that we gave our junior brother something wrong? It's over, junior brother's spiritual energy goes up to his head. He's crazy, let's not mess with him. Huang Erpeng trembled, and said firmly. Chapter 7, Turtle Pattern, Recognizing the Lord. In the following days, when Zhang Depang and others looked at Bai Xiaochun's thatched hut, they all paid attention at all times. Since Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base broke through to the second level of condensed energy, and he went out to talk to himself, his practice in the hut continued again. Inside the house, Bai Xiaochun wiped off the sweat from his forehead, naked, endured the severe pain, gritted his teeth and tried hard to pose for the third picture. The chi in his body is no longer a stream, but is about to become a small river, swimming in his body. Every time he swims a circle, his body will make a crackling sound, the original round body. At this moment, she has lost weight completely, even a circle thinner than when she first came to Huozafang. But there are bursts of strength, which seem to be stored in his body. With the persistence of practice, his thin body seems to be beating slightly, and even if he listens carefully, he can faintly hear the thumping sound of his heart echoing. Houses. More and more spiritual pressure was continuously condensed in his body. This feeling of being stronger every moment made Bai Xiaochun more motivated, until a few days later, Bai Xiaochun's whole body was stabbed sharply. The pain was much more severe than before, so he had to give up. Panting heavily, Bai Xiaochun's eyes were bloodshot. He had a strong feeling that his body couldn't hold it anymore. Although he would constantly absorb the spiritual power from the surrounding world during his cultivation, he obviously couldn't keep up with it. The consumption of the body and the extra meals in the fire kitchen also depend on luck, not every day. After all, most people practice the Ziki Ding Ding Kung Fu once a few days. Even if they are diligent, they can only do it once a day at most. He does it here day and night, all the time. Not to mention Fatty Zhang and others. If the inner sect disciples knew about it, they would all be shocked. It's just that he has cultivated to this level, but Bai Xiaochun still feels unsafe. He has always been keen on safety and security. So he took out the one-time spiritual rice that he hid, held it in his hand, looked at it, and then used an ordinary pot to remove it. When it was cooked, he swallowed it without any hesitation as the spirit energy released. The lingmi melted in his mouth, forming a rich aura, which was many times stronger than ordinary lingmi. It was not a level of majestic power at all. It rushed out of his body with a bang. Bai Xiaochun hurriedly practiced, and put out the third as shown in the picture above. Adjust your breathing. Just like that, half a month later, one late night, Bai Xiaochun's body shook violently. When he opened his eyes, he suddenly discovered that his cultivation had unknowingly broken through the second layer of condensed energy and became the third layer of condensed energy. This change made Bai Xiaochun immediately ecstatic, with excitement in his eyes, and he laughed loudly. He looked at his body. The energy channels in his body had completely transformed from a stream to a small river. This small river swims quickly in the body. The speed is much faster than before. Even with just one thought, the spiritual energy in the body will instantly swim to any position in the body with his mind. Third layer of condensed energy. This spiritual rice from the first spirit refining is really extraordinary. Bai Xiaochun stood up, licked his lips, and deliberately made a few more grains of spiritual rice, but felt the meridians in his body swell. Thinking of the bamboo book according to the introduction on the website, I know that I need to let my body get used to it, and I can't continue to practice for a short time. Only then did I suppress my previous thoughts, and walked up and down the room, looking smug, but soon stopped, and looked at the outer door along the window. Although it was late at night, I could vaguely see it with the help of moonlight. The big tree on the path outside the fire stove. No, Su Baocai's wooden sword seems a little unusual. Even if it reaches the third level of condensed energy, it's not safe. Bai Xiaochun frowned, and after a moment of thought, he glanced at the colorful wooden swords beside him, and then at the house. The pot inside. If you can refine the spirit twice, maybe it will be safer. Thinking of this, he immediately made a decision, and went out of the room to get some spirit wood from the stove room. After the preparations were completed, in the middle of the night, Bai Xiaochun stood beside the mysterious pot, lit the wood fire, saw a streak light up, and threw the wooden sword into the pot. But this time, after waiting for a long time, there was still no response. Bai Xiaochun frowned, looked at the pattern on the tortoise pattern pot, and then saw that the wood fire under it had turned to ashes, pondered Xiaoqing, and went out to find some spiritual wood, but after a few times, no matter how the flame burned, there was still no slight change in the wooden sword. These are all one-color firewood. Could it be that the temperature is not enough and needs a higher heat, two-color fire? Bai Xiaochun thought of this, walked out of the door, and when he came back again, he was already holding a piece of purple wood in his hand. There are not many stoves left, Bai Xiaochun only found one. After putting it under the pot to ignite, a flame appeared immediately. This flame was composed of two colors, and it was a two-color fire with a much higher height. As soon as the two-color fire appeared, the second pattern on the tortoise pattern pot was bright for a moment. But the two-color fire quickly dimmed, as if all the firepower was taken away at once. After a while, when the two-color fire after it was completely burned to ashes, the second spirit pattern on the tortoise pattern pot had already lit up. It's done! Bai Xiaochun's eyes lit up, and he quickly put the wooden sword in the pot. A silver light suddenly flashed, and the time was actually several breaths longer than the previous one. Seeing that it was slowly dimming, but suddenly, the silver light rose sharply and came straight towards Bai Xiaochun. This change happened so suddenly that Bai Xiaochun had no time to react. There was a blur in front of his eyes, an indescribable coldness, like freezing in an instant, blending into Bai Xiaochun's body. He was horrified to find that he couldn't stop it at all, and watched the icy cold whipping hard in his body. His whole complexion paled immediately, and when his eyes blurred, it seemed that something was sucked out of his body one after another, and merged into the tortoise pattern pot. It wasn't until this moment that the silver light dissipated, and a wooden sword that was sharper than before, and even made people's eyes hurt when looking at it, suddenly appeared in the pot. Although this sword still looks colorful and tattered, the wooden texture inside it has changed. If you wipe off the paint, you can clearly see the starburst from those textures. This sword has been completely and fundamentally changed. Up! Almost at the same time as the wooden sword appeared, there was a rumbling sound of thunder in the sky on the south bank of Lingxi sect, as if there was a roar from the sky, shaking countless monks of Lingxi sect. Go fast and go fast! While the thunder echoed, a second silver streak appeared on the wooden sword's body, flickered several times in a row, and then dimmed, disappearing under the smeared variegated colors. Bai Xiaochun didn't care to look at the wooden sword, and took a few steps back with a cloudy expression. His body was on the verge of falling, and it took him a while to recover. The feeling of that moment just now made him feel lingering fear. What was taken out of my body? His eyes fell on the bronze mirror hanging on the wall in anxiety. After subconsciously taking a look, he rubbed his eyes and looked carefully again. Gradually, he was stunned. In the mirror, there was an extra white hair on the tip of his forehead, and although his appearance had not changed, he seemed to be a year older no matter how he looked. Life! Bai Xiaochun murmured in despair. The only thing that is missing is my lifespan. I. He wanted to cry but had no tears. The purpose of his practice was to live long, but now he has not obtained long life, and instead lost a year of life. Speaking of which, the blow can be described as huge. It's a loss. I never imagined that I, Bai Xiaochun, have been safe for half of my life, but sometimes I stumble. He sat there blankly, and smiled wryly. After calming down, he raised his head to look at the tortoise-patterned pot, but his eyes slowed down, showing a strange meaning. He had a faint feeling that after the life essence was sucked away, there was some kind of connection between himself and the turtle-pattern pot, as if he could control it. With a thought in his heart, he raised his right hand and pointed at the pot. Immediately, the black light of the tortoise-patterned pot flashed, and it shrank instantly, heading straight for Bai Xiaochun, and disappeared into his fingertips in the blink of an eye. And looked at the empty stove. This. He pointed his right hand to the ground again, black light shone, and with a bang, the pot appeared again. Bai Xiaochun tried several times in a row. His expression was cloudy, both joyful and melancholy, and finally he sighed. Although it can be absorbed into the body at this moment, the cost is a year's lifespan. No matter how you think about it, it is still a loss. In the afternoon of the next day, when Bai Xiaochun was thinking about how to get back the life essence that had been sucked out of him, he suddenly looked up and felt 7 or 8 figures galloping towards him outside the fire stove. Bai Xiaochun couldn't notice it at the first level of condensed energy, but now at the third level of condensed energy, he immediately felt that among the 7 or 8 figures, the leader was Su Baokai. At the same time, Su Baocai's voice, full of resentment, suddenly came. Bai Xiaochun, you have a senior brother guarding you, and I, Su Baokai, have one too. Today's grievances between you and me should be resolved. Chapter 8 I fight with you. Seeing Su Baokai approaching, Bai Xiaochun stood up abruptly. It came so fast. There was hesitation in his eyes. Although he had made full preparations in the past 6 months, he still felt that he was not ready. Originally, according to his idea, he had to wait until the 4th layer of condensed air to be ensured. But now that the other party came with 7 or 8 people, Bai Xiaochun knew he couldn't avoid it, so he gritted his teeth hard. Fight it! He took a deep breath, put on 7 or 8 leather jackets, and carried the spare pot for boiling lingmi on his back, then nervously opened the door and walked out. Almost at the same time as he walked out, Zhang Depeng and others were also aggressively confronting Su Baokai and the others in front of the door of the fire kitchen with kitchen knives and spoons. I said why I heard crows calling this morning. It turns out that you group of supervisors who only know how to squeeze the bastards from the same door come to our fire stove room to play wild. Zhang Dafet snorted coldly, standing there like a hill. His voice was like thunder, spread around. Big fatty Zhang, others are afraid of your Huozafang, but our supervisory office doesn't care about you. We received a cry from junior brother Su and came here today to exercise the rights of the supervisory office. Do you dare to resist? The 7 or 8 figures around Su Baokai. One by one they all looked proud. Although their clothes were also dressed as handymen, there was an obvious word of supervision on the cuffs, which represented their extraordinary rights and identities in the supervisory office. In particular, one of the big men was even more hulking, exuding a 3-layer spiritual pressure, with a cold light flashing in his eyes, looking at Fatty Zhang coldly, turning a blind eye to the other people around Fatty Zhang. Fart, it's reasonable to chase and kill my junior brother. Fatty Zhang sneered, and when he raised his right hand, he let out a cry, and the big black pot behind him floated up by itself, and the momentum was like a rainbow, causing the expressions of everyone around the big man to change. But the big man's eyes narrowed, and a small flag flew out from between his hands, spreading out the mist. And he could faintly hear the roar of beasts coming from the mist. Just at the moment when the sword was on the verge of breaking out, Su Baokai saw Bai Xiaochun walking out of the hut at a glance, and suddenly new and old hatred came to his heart, and he let out a loud roar. Bai Xiaochun! Su Baokai rushed forward as he spoke, raised his right hand and waved, and immediately the wooden sword in his hand flew out with a whistling sound. Fatty Zhang and the others changed their expressions, and when they were about to block them, the big man in the supervisor's room sneered and stopped them immediately. But just as Su Baocai's words came out, and the moment his body rushed away, Bai Xiaochun's eyes were red, and he also yelled. Su Baokai, you are too aggressive. I will fight with you. Bai Xiaochun's heart was pounding. He had never fought with anyone in his life, let alone a monk. At this moment, he was so nervous that he was almost nervous, and at the same time he yelled to embolden himself. The power of the third level of qi condensation suddenly exploded, and with all his cultivation, he injected all the spiritual energy in his body into the wooden sword, and controlled the wooden sword in his hand. Point to Su Baokai. The wooden sword buzzed, and the two silver streaks hidden on the colorful sword body flashed slightly, causing the sword body to swell in a big circle in an instant, bursting out a threatening cold light, and went straight to Su Baokai. The speed and momentum surprised Zhang Depang and others, as well as everyone in the supervisory office. What made them gasp was that the sharpness of the sword spread unexpectedly and enveloped the surroundings, which was shocking. They looked at each other again and again. Not to fight, they all looked at each other. Before Su Baokai rushed too close, he was taken aback by Bai Xiaochun's aura. The Bai Xiaochun who looked like this was completely different from what he remembered a few months ago, as if he was a different person. Su Baokai was surprised. Immediately afterwards, his eyes widened suddenly, revealing an inconceivable look. He saw Bai Xiaochun's wooden sword flying towards him so fast that it almost formed a white streak. I saw it in the fighting method of the disciples, and I was shocked and my scalp went numb. With a bang, Bai Xiaochun's wooden sword directly collided with Su Baocai's wooden sword. Su Baocai's wooden sword trembled violently, and it couldn't stop it at all. It shattered inch by inch from the tip of the sword, and it was completely destroyed in the blink of an eye, becoming countless fragments, lazing backwards. And Bai Xiaochun's wooden sword didn't stop at all. It rushed out suddenly, and went straight to Su Baokai. Su Baokai was so frightened that he was scared out of his wits, and he used all his strength to dodge quickly. Before barely dodging, the wooden sword brushed past him, and stabbed the big man beside him tree. With a bang, most of the big tree was split open and fell down. At the same time as bursts of dust were kicked up, Su Baokai also let out a scream, blood spattered from his right arm, and he retreated quickly with a pale face. This is because Bai Xiaochun is not very proficient in controlling objects, otherwise, that sword is enough to kill Su Baokai without a whole body. 3 layers of condensed energy. Impossible, this is impossible. When looking at Bai Xiaochun, Su Baokai already had a look of fear from the devil. For the wooden sword to have such power, at least 3 layers of condensed energy are needed. It is impossible to imagine that Bai Xiaochun has become so amazing in just a few months. This has reversed his cognition and made him unacceptable, like a nightmare. Don't say it was him who was stunned. At this moment, the big man in the supervisor's room and everyone around him took a deep breath, and when they looked at Bai Xiaochun, they were already extremely dignified, using spiritualization to make the light of the sword disperse. This is a supernatural power that can only be formed when the purple qi mastering the cauldron has been cultivated to the level of lightness. The big man in the supervisor's room took a deep breath, and when he looked at Bai Xiaochun, his eyes faintly revealed fear. They are all like this here, let alone Zhang Depang and others. When they looked at Bai Xiaochun one by one, their expressions were also full of shock. The sword light scattered in all directions, and it obviously inflated a circle to represent the realm of lifting weights lightly. This is the first time they know it from Bai Xiaochun. Even Bai Xiaochun himself was shocked by the power of the wooden sword. He stared blankly at the collapsed tree, then at Su Baokai, who was pale at the moment, and immediately laughed out loud. Su Baokai, it turns out you are so weak, give me a sword. Bai Xiaochun cheered up. He realized that he was so much stronger than Su Baokai, he was immediately refreshed, and went straight to Su Baokai while laughing. When Su Baokai was swept by Bai Xiaochun's gaze, his body trembled. Seeing Bai Xiaochun's laugh and approaching figure, he was immediately terrified and wanted to run away. But before he could take a few steps away, Bai Xiaochun had already come up close. Looking at Su Baokai, Bai Xiaochun thought of the scenes of being chased by this person and the painstaking practice he had in these days. All the bitterness turned into strength. He lifted his foot hard. He kicked towards Su Baokai. Let you chase me down again. Bai Xiaochun clenched his fist with his right hand and landed on Su Baokai's eyes. Su Baokai screamed and fell to the ground. Force! Get on my head! Let you know that my young master is not a vegetarian. Bai Xiaochun jumped up and stepped down hard, gritting his teeth, punching and kicking. Su Baokai's wailing continued. The sound of bang bang spread all around, whether it was the big man in the supervisory office, or Zhang Depang and others. They all stayed there at the moment, looking at Su Baokai, who was being beaten violently, and looking at Bai Xiaochun, who was getting more and more excited after the beating. All of them felt hairy from the bottom of their hearts. But Su Baokai's tears flowed down, and his heart was wrung to the extreme. He couldn't believe that Bai Xiaochun had become so powerful in the past few months, especially that supernatural power that lifted weights lightly. Without several years or even more years of attainments, it could not be formed at all. In his opinion, this Bai Xiaochun clearly has a big background, and he was so strong from the very beginning. Because of his mean and shameless personality, he pretended to be so weak. It's all true. Thinking of this, Su Baokai felt sad from the bottom of his heart, and was so annoyed that he fainted. Seeing that Su Baokai was unconscious, Bai Xiaochun patted his clothes, stood up from Su Baokai, raised his right hand, and immediately the wooden sword flew towards him. And he put it on his cuff, to conceal the excitement in the eyes. The burly man in the supervisor's room took a deep look at Bai Xiaochun. His face was uncertain, and he clasped his fists for the last time. Junior brother Bai hides really deeply. I admire. He said blankly, turned around without hesitation, led people away, and carried away Su Baokai, who was unconscious. Until everyone left, Zhang Depang and others came to Bai Xiaochun's side, and when they looked at Bai Xiaochun, they all smiled. After all, the supervisory office is an outsider. And Zhang Depang and others know Bai Xiaochun's hard work over the past few months. Most of them are convinced. You boy, it's fine, I didn't spend my life in vain for half a year. Fatty Zhang patted Bai Xiaochun's shoulder. That's right, I'm desperate, I'm afraid. Bai Xiaochun proudly raised his head like a proud little rooster, making Zhang Depang and others laugh again.